We've got a very incredible edition of the second draft for you today. Sorry.
Yeah, that's rough.
Because The Incredibles 2 just came out, and obviously a very important movie.
Thoughts?
Massively hyped movie. We've got thoughts. They're mostly good thoughts. A few critiques, but let's get into it. Welcome back to the second draft.
Welcome back. So we waited 14 years. 14 years. There's even there's a segment at the beginning of the movie, if you haven't seen it, where the filmmakers, Brad Bird in particular, gets out there and says...
Sam Jackson, Holly Hunter...
Yeah, the casting director, who is also a member of the cast, he plays Edna Mode, if you're not familiar. They come out and they say, yeah, we know it's been a long time, but it's worth it. We're waiting. We waited, and I had read for the longest time, I think it was about 10 years after the first one came out, we're like, it's a decade, are they going to do a surprise release? Because there's always those people on the internet, they're like, oh, it's a surprise release. It wasn't going to be there, and somebody had interviewed Brad Bird, and he had said, I will not make a second Incredibles movie until I find an idea that's better than the first. And as interesting as it is to say that, I don't know that the idea was better, but I do think the execution, and I think the movie was better. I think the movie was excellent. I loved it. I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah, let's get right into the whole idea that Brad Bird didn't want to make a sequel until he found an idea that was better. Let's jump right into that.
Yeah.
I'm going to preface this by saying The Incredibles is my favorite Pixar movie by far.
That's good.
But for whatever reason, maybe it's because I'm getting older, I wasn't massively hyped to see this. I was excited to see it, but I didn't go into this with massive expectations, is what I'm trying to say. Mm-hmm. That being said, I kind of feel like this movie had the exact same idea as the first movie.
It was similar.
So, I mean, the movie, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen it, just stop watching. Like, subscribe, leave a comment below. All the weird...
Smash the button.
Right, but stop watching. The film takes place immediately, seconds after the first one ends. And it's literally been the span of 2 days. And immediately after that fact, we've got yet another villain who is trying to exploit supers for their own agenda and splitting the family apart. And this is a movie that I think if they had not waited 14 years to make would have been fine. If this movie had come out 2 years after the original come out, everything would have been okay. But because it was so far after the fact, it was so massively hyped and so longed for, that the fact that the two films thematically are so similar plays against it in a big way.
I think that when you have set themes, which they did, family values being one of the top ones, if not the entire central theme of the movie, just be there for your family, kind of. They're limited in some ways in terms of antagonists, in terms of conflict.
Sure.
In a way that, if they create something, it's going to feel a little bit derivative, because plenty of people have explored that before,
right.
And especially in a kids movie. And what I really dug about this movie is that it took the time to have teaching moments for the kids that were watching it for the first time, probably never saw the original Incredibles. When was 2004 was when the original was released. So it took the time to invest in some of those teaching moments, but then also had moments where it was definitely for the adults.
Sure.
Beyond a level that Disney and Pixar have gone into with innuendo, but it was very much more intellectual.
Right.
There's a scene where Helen is having a conversation with, again, spoilers, the person that ends up being the antagonist. It's this really interesting intellectual boxing match that you don't see in a kids movie ever.
Except in Pixar movies.
Yeah,
Pixar is really good about balancing those themes and those... They walk a very fine line between the adult themes and the child themes, and it works great for them. But,
yeah. And there are slight political undertones, nothing completely over the top.
I did kind of catch a couple, make supers legendary again or something like that, just a couple of offhand comments that weren't on the nose, but it was just enough where I was like, did they say that just now? Oh. Okay.
But yeah, there's multiple scenes where they're having their conversations and they're always talking, they're having cocktails.
Right.
And a kid's going to watch that and be like, oh, they're drinking Kool-Aid, cool. Sure. But yeah, it's these two women are just trying to crush the Bechdel test and have an interesting conversation.
Right.
I was really surprised. And then there was a plain moment, like right at the resolution of the movie, where like Violet has hold of Jack, and they're all going to go do their crazy super thing. And the whole movie, they're just passing off the baby to everybody else.
Right.
And she's like, you know what? No, I'm going to take, like, it's safer for him to be with me. I have the force fields. And like, it just makes more sense. And then Bob, who has been like struggling to be like the father figure the whole time, is like, that's my girl. And he says the line that Elastigirl always says.
Right.
And like, it's this cool like teaching moment that was very plain, very on the nose, and it was supposed to be, and I didn't have any qualms with it at all.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's just, the movie in and of itself works very well, I think. It's Pixar. The only thing they've made that I haven't really enjoyed was like Cars 3, because at that point, you know, thematically the whole series just played out. It was done for money. Again, for me, everything worked in terms of writing and themes, and for me, it just felt like, again, it felt like a movie that should have been made 10 years ago. Because it's too far a stretch of time to be still working on those same themes. It's almost like if you watch like the pilot episode of a TV series, and we're not going to make the TV series anymore, and all of a sudden they relaunch it, and they go into episode 2 like 10 years later. It's cool that all those characters are back. It's cool that they're all still in similar situations, but at the same time, we've all grown as an audience, whereas these characters haven't. And there's a disconnect, at least for me, there, where I was like, okay, where's going to be like the big revelation? Like, where are we going to see something big and different, unique? And that was my own baggage coming into it after 14 years of waiting, because those characters haven't hit that point yet. It's a weird thing.
It's a typical fandom quandary, though. Like, I think you run into that with a lot of different things. People say that all the time in fiction novels. You know, like Game of Thrones. People are giving George Martin a hard time now because he's taking his time to write the books, but I think what it is that the fans have just had too much time to speculate. They've been into it for so long that now and I think that's what happened with Star Wars. And I've been seeing it's still to like yesterday on Twitter there was this like whole manifesto that was written by like probably 2 or 3 people.
I saw that. That was the biggest load of bullshit.
And they're like speaking for the entire Star Wars fandom, which really the reason I think it gained exposure was all the people that were like, no, this is not at all what it is. But I'm just saying that proves my point is that when you give your audience too much time to speculate, it's really tough to dive back in.
Right.
And I think that's why creators like Joss Whedon, even though he has like buy-in from some of the cast, won't make Firefly again. 1, because he's kind of wrapped it up, but 2,
right.
And I know that's an entirely different can of worms, but like 2, just the fans have had too much time to think about what could happen. I mean, I've speculated on it, I've podcasted on it, like I've had many lengthy bar conversations about what would happen.
Right.
People don't have that about The Incredibles necessarily, but this is a movie that I watched over and over and over again when I was like 12 years old.
Yeah, I'm sure I've seen it like 100 times probably.
Yeah, and you think like, oh, it would be really incredible to see this, that, the other thing. What they did was they checked all the boxes for a proper sequel. Like they made it similar enough for you to remember and different enough that it was interesting, and you could visually see all the animation upgrades and things like that.
Yeah, and that was one thing I really took away from it visually, was the fact that I loved that Pixar keeps evolving in terms of visuals. Obviously, the technology to make these movies keeps getting better and better year after year. It looked so much richer and so much better, but at the same time, it wasn't jarringly different visually from the first movie. Yeah. I think they made a lot of really, really smart choices when it came to doing that, because it is 14 years later, but kids are going to watch these back to back. And you don't want something that looks like it's made in like 2004. It looks like it's made in 2018.
Right.
They still kind of do, but I think like if you look back at like the very first Toy Story, it's kind of rudimentary in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But they made a sequel, and then they made another sequel, and it feels like a natural evolution where it's not horribly jarring. Like Buzz Lightyear isn't like just 4K all of a sudden, like all kinds of weird shit.
They took the same picture and they just drew in a little bit more detail.
Exactly, which I loved. Yeah, it was very smart. Yeah.
And I watched the first movie just before the second one. I went and watched it in theaters, and I remember looking at it thinking like, this looks like a CAD drawing, like 3D rendering of just like characters that I know people are putting on YouTube animations that are almost as good as this. And this took like teams of people, years to build. And they even said so in that kind of beginning disclaimer that it takes people years and years and years to build these
Hundreds of people. Yeah, it's insane. It's crazy. Yeah.
So to see that, it was really encouraging. I mean, even like the details in Frozen's ice and like the water the fluid mechanics in the animation style was just like so much better.
Yeah, like the spectrum of how every character was able to use their powers was much broader and much more fleshed out because they had the technology to do it better. Like Frozen wasn't just like skating along like a beam of ice. He was actually like throwing different sort of densities of ice at objects and doing all kinds of cool shit. It was cool.
Yeah, Violet got to throw the force field for the first time, which was interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, Jack stole the show. Everybody knew he was going to.
Yeah.
I think just the animators and Brad Bird must have just had so much fun with that character that they just couldn't invest time in it. Couldn't not invest time in it. They did the short with Jack. I think it's called Jack Attack. That Pixar short is so good. And Kari was just kind of like this weird highlight character of the first movie that was just so secondary to the plot and had nothing to do with anything, but was really memorable because it was really well edited.
Right.
So to see kind of all of that revisited with the family kind of having to deal with that was really entertaining. I don't know, I really dug it.
It was cool. And the fight between Jack and the raccoon is like all-time hilarious.
So good.
Just couldn't stop laughing through the whole thing. It was great.
They just, I think it was rehashing Jack Attack and like, but on another level.
Yeah. Cast was stellar. I love Craig T. Nelson. I've been a massive fan of his since watching Coach on Nick at Night. Actually, watching Coach when it was still on the air. Love him. He was amazing in Poltergeist. Like he's had a great career. He vocally, he hasn't aged a day. He still sounds exactly like Mr. Incredible. He sounds amazing. Holly Hunter is amazingly dynamic. I love the addition this time around of Catherine Keener as the villain, and then Bob Odenkirk as her brother. And I love the fact that Bob Odenkirk's character kind of looked like him too, which is cool. But I think Catherine Keener actually stole the show in a lot of scenes. I thought she was fantastic as the villain. So.
I also think the casting in terms of voice type and just like slight inflections was really excellent.
Sure.
Like, Violet kind of sounds like she's got something of a lisp, and you pick that up because Holly Hunter kind of has a lisp as well.
Yeah.
And it's more of like a southern drawl thing for her, but
right.
But Violet definitely has that as that character.
Yeah.
I think Elastigirl was just like meant to be, but like a really standout character in Incredibles 2, and it was really cool movie to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
All of that explored. We didn't see a Pizza Planet truck. I've been told that it's there.
Oh, it's got to be in there somewhere. It's got to be in like one of the chase scenes, like maybe the monorail scene or something.
I'm told it's after she confronts the screenslaver the first time, and he is getting arrested because they say he's a pizza delivery guy.
Right.
So he evidently was driving the Pizza Planet truck. I didn't see it, but I was reading about it afterwards.
That's a good call. I didn't think about that.
So people are saying like after she parachutes down, she like lands in front of a old model of the Pizza Planet truck because the car did not exist in the 60s, which is when it was filmed.
Yeah.
Or not filmed, but like it's set. The film is set in the 60s.
Yeah. That's cool.
So the model vehicle was not made, but they did like a retro version, I guess.
Yeah. If you saw the Pizza Planet truck and you know where it's at, let us know in the comments below.
Yeah.
I might actually have to just see the movie again just to find
the pizza. Well, there's all the typical A113 and like your standard Pixar things, but that's one that in The Incredibles, the first movie, famously does not have the Pizza Planet truck.
Yeah.
And I think that was an intentional choice. People are saying that Bird just like left it out unintentionally, just missed it in the edit.
Could be.
And that's possible.
Yeah.
But I think it might have been an intentional choice. Like, the vehicle did not exist at such a time. I don't even know if in the 60s people were delivering pizzas.
I'm pretty sure they were. I think so.
Like, to the scale that we are now, where they're branded and corporatized like that.
True.
Though, I don't know.
Yeah, they didn't have like Domino's and stuff like that back then.
But sure, your like local Italian restaurant might drop off a pizza. I could see that.
Yeah.
But you would know the kid and like would probably have, you'd invite him in and you'd have pizza all together. That kind of situation. Yeah, I mean, this movie was really great though. Like some of the things were rehashed in terms of just like, bring the family together, take care of your siblings, take care of your children, take care of your family. But then they like pitted each other all against one another, and you know, had and that's a pretty classic twist, I guess. So it's a little bit tropey, but
yeah, and I like the shift in dynamic. In the first movie, it was Mr. Incredible who was being recruited by what he thought was like a special organization that was gonna, you know, make him a hero, and it was his outlet from the ordinary everyday life he'd fall into because supers were made illegal. So he was going out on all the adventures and whatnot, and it was Elastigirl who's taking care of the family. And this time it's flipped, where it's Elastigirl who's going out as the agent for what ends up being the villain, which again is kind of a little too thematically similar to the first movie for my taste, but I get it. But it was cool to see that reversal, and I think it's very telling of modern times, where a lot of times, sometimes you might have a stay-at-home dad, and you might have the mom who's out there as a breadwinner. It was cool that they shifted that dynamic, and I'm sure it was a conscious effort to do it. But I thought it was brilliant having Mr. Incredible, who's maybe got a shorter fuse and less temper than Elastigirl, having to be the guy who's going to take care of all the kids while Elastigirl's having all these adventures. And all those scenes where Bob, you know, Mr. Incredible is talking on the phone to Helen, Elastigirl, and he's, "Oh, that sounds great, honey. Wow, I'm so proud of you." And he just desperately wants to be out there. I thought it was cool. It was a really good shift in dynamic.
yeah, then I mean there were little nods. That reminds me of like little nods to Outer Limits and like this showing the 60s. But yeah, it's something. It's really interesting to see like the character that's meant to be like indestructible brought low by just like everyday average things.
Yeah.
Because you identify with that character so much more. Like in the first movie, all it is in the beginning is like Bob freaking out about like the most mundane things, like slipping on a skateboard and then the tricycle kid, which everybody loved from the first movie, freaking out.
That was wicked.
That was totally wicked. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, to see that in play was really interesting.
Yeah.
Elastigirl's like monorail chase scene was really cool too.
That was rad. Yeah. Yeah. There was another scene I really liked too. It was a fight scene between Mr. Incredible and Elastigirl. And I love that payoff in the end where they cross paths again. It's like, yeah, it was cool. Yeah. Yeah. The movie is clever, super clever. I don't think thematically and plot wise it was terribly original, just because it was a little too close to the first one, but it still got that awesome Pixar humor and wit and cleverness to it all the way throughout. Like, it was wildly enjoyable. So
yeah, it's tough because I feel like a lot of folks have to get into the same storyline in terms of like registering supers. Like we've seen that in X-Men before, we've seen that
Civil War,
and yeah, exactly, in Civil War. Like it's a common superhero thing, and superheroes are just inherently trope ridden. So I mean, take that and compound it with kids story, animated, and like family based. Like you can only circumvent so many of those. So I'm impressed with what they were able to accomplish. In the end, I think it was good because the promises they made at the beginning of the movie were paid off.
Sure.
In the end, they fulfilled those promises, and that was, in my mind, that's what makes a holistically like successful story.
Yeah, I agree. So let me ask you this: we just covered the fact that both of these films deal with the whole making illegal of superheroes, and the fact that both movies have featured a villain that wants to exploit both that law and supers themselves with their own agenda. Do you want to see, or is it kind of beneath Pixar at this point, to do a film where they're just going up against like a plain old traditional old school villain, like the Underminer or somebody? Like, I think I kind of want to see that for Incredibles 3 if they ever do one in 15 years. Maybe they've said all they need to say socially and politically and whatnot, and maybe just have them go against like a dyed-in-the-wool villain, like without any ulterior motives besides taking on the world. Like, maybe it's time to shift away from that whole paradigm and just delve right into the family dynamics of, I don't know, maybe they should just keep going with that formula, or maybe this is all we've seen with the Incredibles. Who knows? But
I think it might be. I'm not convinced that they're going to make another one, and I heard plenty of people walking out of the theater saying like, "Oh, I wonder what they're going to do next." And what would be interesting to see, I think, is, you know, they took so much time to make a movie that immediately followed. If they cranked out another one quickly, but it was like 10 years down the line, I think it would be really interesting.
Like Violet's going off to college or something like that.
Like puberty.
He would be practically like Dash's age at that point. Yeah.
Considering the whole like poly mutant thing that he's got going on, he'd probably like figure out what his actual abilities are.
Yeah.
But yeah, to see them maybe go up against like a more traditional villain. I mean, we did get to see a lot more interesting use of their powers in this movie, and all of them together at the same times as well, with like the anti-Avengers coming after them essentially, and them having to kind of like all work together to make that happen is really interesting.
And I did like that expansion into having a whole bunch of different supers all involved, seeing all those different powers one out. It wasn't just about the family. It was about supers in general, so they had to bring in like a whole new cast of like secondary characters or something.
Yeah, they work well because you want to see more of them, but there's no reason to see more of them. So make them antagonists, make them like unintentional villains.
Yeah.
I love the moment where the Crusher has crushed all the pipes on the boat,
Oh yeah.
and Mr. Incredible's trying to get him to undo it. He's like, uncrush? he just can't figure out the concept of not like uncrushing something. Yeah.
You can't unpunch, I don't uncrush. Yeah.
Yeah, that Pixar humor, just clever as hell.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good note to end on. It's got the highest opening weekend or week for an animated film ever. So chances are you've seen it multiple times. Chances are everybody you know has seen it. But if you haven't, go and check it out because it's another home run for Pixar. I mean, at this point they're batting maybe not 1,000, but probably close to like 9.7, 9.8. Yeah, they're killing it. So. Thanks for hanging out with us. Thanks for drinking an adult beverage while talking about an arguably children's movie. And
Pixar, I mean,
it's for everybody, just like beer. Don't drink beer, kids. Thank you for stopping by. We love you guys, and we'll catch you next time. Cheers.
I can't do both.